is Amit, and I work for ClearTrip. I'm sure some of you would know us. We are an online travel company which started way back in 2006 in Mumbai. So today I'm going to talk to you about our journey in terms of how we managed to sort of take ClearTrip brand from India back into the 8 markets internationally today that we are present. So we're going to talk about the journey of our brand taking from its origins in India to the international markets, and sort of how we sort of done that. So in brief, today, as I said, we started way back in 2006. Today, we are present in about 8 countries, about 750 plus people, representing about 14 nationalities. We have offices in 4 different time zones and work with about 2,000 plus suppliers globally, and work with about 20 plus marketing and distribution partners globally in there. So this is how sort of been our journey. So as I said, we started way back in 2006. That was the time when the internet infrastructure in India was sort of started to take its roots. The aviation industry was going through the deregulation with the starts of the new low-cost carriers like the Indigos and the SpiceJet coming up. And also that was the time when the payment infrastructure, the digitalization of the payment was it's taking the shape. So that was the sort of time, what we call is sort of the birth of the internet commerce in India. And from 2006 to 11, we saw sort of a hyper growth in that in that market, where we saw the sort of digitalization of the entire commerce sort of have happened, and that was boosted by the better infrastructure in terms of connectivity, better sort of payment methodology. Lot of sort of the financial institutes worked to make sure that digital transactions were safe and secure. And as we call it, this was a time where we all used to sort of, we call it as the time where there was a gold rush. So everybody wanted to be in there and pouring out money, throwing out sort of discounts, luring the customers in there. So that was the sort of the period of a hyper growth in the travel and generally the e-commerce in the country. And 2011 is the time when obviously sort of we started sort of looking at in terms of how do we sort of see our brand and position ourselves as an organization for the next 10 to 15 years. And that's sort of some of the sort of the interesting data trends that we saw in terms of in our business. And that was the time when we saw there was very, very clear India Middle East corridor in terms of we saw the sort of consumer behavior. And obviously that's partly because of the large Indian expat diaspora which sort of is there in the country, and that's very mobile. Unlike the sort of some other countries, these people have a far more frequent travel back and forth from India, and there's a far more sort of mobility, both in terms of people will go work for a couple of years, come back 2-3 years, and then they'll go back in there. So 2012 was when we sort of started our the international foray with Dubai and the UAE being our first port of entry in there. From 2006 to 2016 is when we expanded beyond UAE to the other GCC countries, which are mainly Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman. And 2016 is when we launched in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And from there, 2017, we sort of acquired a local company, which was the number 1 online company in Saudi Arabia by the name of Flyin. And then 2018, we sort of completed our transaction. And 2019, that we are by far the largest online company in the Middle East and among the top 5 travel companies in the entire GCC region. And as we sort of look back in 2020 and the next decade ahead of us, is we look at the other frontiers for us in terms of the moving into the North Africa and the Sub-Saharan Africa. So what was our approach in India? As I said, the first 5 years was generally the euphoria, a lot of money that young companies like ours raised, and that was in terms of, as I said, was all on the sort of golden rush in terms of. But we sort of realized after the first 5 years of our business in terms of, what is the market, what is the niche that we want to play in, what's the sort of, what will be our uniqueness, what will our brand that will sort of stand as. And that's sort of when we sort of started finding our sweet spot for our business, and which was in terms of, that we wanted to go after as the internet commerce was maturing and India saw a very rapid sort of move from offline to online. Just to sort of give you one anecdote, it took about 16 years in the United States of America, which is probably the most advanced digital e-commerce market in the world, from a first air booking to get when you get the 50% of all your air bookings getting into the online. It took about 16 years. In Europe, it took about 12 years by the time that happened. In India, it took only about 5 years, little less than 5 years that, we got to the 50% in there. So, that's the sort of kind of a rapid transformation which is, which happened in there. And as I said, in that sort of doing that, sort of you realize what are the key strengths of your brand, and what is that what's the kind of organization, what the kind of sort of customers you want to serve, and what are the kind of, also the sustainability you want to give to the organization. And that was sort of, we sort of figured out as our sweet spot, because of the strength that we had developed in the design and the product, was people who were more value seekers, people who were more high frequent traveler, who were willing to pay premium or willing to value the experience and the entire smoothness of the product. Now, that doesn't mean that, we only want to serve those customers, but that essentially is when you sort of start finding your niche and you sort of start developing in your strengths, rather than sort of, trying to sort of, be everything for everyone. And India is sort of one market where, we are probably the only market which is adding about close to, barring the last about 8 to 9 months of a little bit of a turbulence in the aviation market. It is by far the fastest growing aviation market in the world in the last 5 years, and it is likely to be so for the next 15 to 20 years, just because of the sheer numbers that we have in terms of. So we add on an average about 5 to 7 million new air travelers every year. And this number is likely to be there, there for about next 10 to 15 years. Just to sort of give you an idea, in the population nearly about 1.3, 1.4 billion, we only have about 110 to 120 million unique air customers, i.e. the people who ever traveled by air. And now this number, given the infrastructure, given the road network, and given the pressure that we have on the rails, and the fastest and the best, most efficient mode of connectivity in a country like ours, which is also quite diverse and distances are large, air will play a very, very important part. And the movement of air being from a luxury to sort of just another mode of transportation that you have is on, and sort of that's sort of catching up in there. And when you sort of look at it for the next 10 to 15 year horizon, you're looking at about 500 odd million air traveler in the country, which is double the current population of United States of America. So those new set of customers are always going to be there, and that's sort of and that's sort of time when we sort of started realizing the market has a sizable size, depth in there, and then you will sort of start finding your niche in there. And that was not done just because one day we woke up and say that we wanted to do this. This is in terms of that essentially over from the start to to date what our DNA has been, and then how we been working on that. As I said, our brand promise has been making travel simple, and when we say making travel simple today, actually if you look at it, booking a travel which let's say 10 to 15 years back, used to be a very, very complex task, right? I remember, I ventured into travel by an accident about 17, 18 years back. And my first interaction was that, when I knew that booking an air ticket was a skill, right? There used to be an IATA used to run a specialized courses, and 80% of that time on the specialized courses used to be people will remember the airport codes, the 3-letter airport codes. Now today, my 7-year-old can book the air ticket, right? And he probably can do it faster than me. So, that's the whole sort of, the complexity today is not in terms of booking the air ticket, the complexity in terms of, how do you make sure, how do you find the right set of search for you. So for example, if I, today searching from Mumbai to London, there are potentially about, 2,500 to 2.5 million combinations available. So how do we make sure that the most relevant combination we throw up to our customers and making sure that we do it at the fastest possible time and make sure that we are able to do it to them in the device of their choice, right? Our lives are not getting that simple, right? And gone are the days 15 years back when laptop used to be or the desktop used to be the only thing. Today, all of us carry, maybe tablet with us, maybe, phone with us. So, and we like to sort of, have a same experience, come what may on that, So how do you sort of, you're building sort of, your design, you're building your sort of the products which the customers that you want to sort of, that you want to go after can relate themselves to. And it's not about in terms of following what your customer would do, but keeping in pace with the changing landscape, the technology in terms of keeping up the pace with them. Whether, as I said, I remember one of the earlier presenters was sharing about the innovators and the early adopters, right? How do you sort of stay ahead of the curve? When you see the voice search it's in infancy stage. All of us on our iPhones use Siri. Some use it only to sort of, call up 1 or 2 numbers. Some use it to even messaging and all that. But that's something which is going to catch up, right? And when you kind of look at that, why do I even need to put, I want to go from Bombay to Delhi, right? When all I can use voice search to make that happen, do it for me. So how do you sort of stay ahead of the curve on that? And, today, all of us, it'll be, even my grandmother started using WhatsApp now, any sort of messaging app in there. This is where your customers are communicating. Why you as a brand will not communicate with them on that? Why do you need to adopt to that once it becomes a mainstream? Because that's the only time when you'll be able to sort of, to get to the customer. Because that's today, the younger customers, for us, and, in the early 40s, it's what I call myself, we are the adapters of the technology. When I look at my sort of, 7-year-old son, these guys are born with these technologies. And probably, if we have another child, which is going to be younger than that, probably, the 6 years between them will have a gap in the technology, which will be probably 30, 40 years. For us, it's learning, but for the customers of tomorrow, or the young customers that we have today, these guys breathe, live the technology day in, day out. And these are these are going to be your customers, most valuable customers. These are the guys who are sort of leaving the colleges, coming into this sort of workplace, and these 3, 4, 5 years, these will be the guys which will have the highest spending powers in there. So you want to make sure that your brand is the most preferred brand for them. And as I said, how do you sort of make sure keep innovating on that? It's the same thing. Everybody sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 guys are doing the same product. Same thing, but how you can do this better, how you can do this more efficiently than anybody else in terms of, so that gives them the reason for people to sort of come back to you again and again. And sort of, this is the sort of, how do you sort of keep introducing new products which is sort of give them, not only reason to come and use you, but also talk about you. And not only then on making sure that the booking, but also in terms of, making sure that post-booking, that they feel involved and you sort of keep them engaged in that. So, result of that, as I said, today we are the number 2 OTA in the country, and sort of, as I said, that's the foundation that we build in. And when we sort of look at that, we took a lot of these stuff that we had done in India, both in terms of on the product side as well as on the payment infrastructure side, and sort of decided to take it into the Middle East in there. So when we go in the Middle East in there were obviously the key characteristics that we look at that. There was a very, very young and aspirational population, because these are the sort of countries which are majority made up of the expats. Like UAE, take an example, for a population about 9.5 million, 90% of the population is expat, i.e. these are the most mobile people. People come here only to work. Once you retire, in all probability, everybody goes back home. So, it's a very young, very mobile, very aspirational population, very, very high propensity to travel. These guys travel back to their home, at least home countries once. Also, sort of, generally the higher incomes means there is a higher disposable spend, which is the higher frequency of travel. They have a world-class aviation infrastructure. We all know among the best airlines today in the world, most of them are from that part of the world, be it the Emirates and the Etihads and the Qatar Airways and the Gulf Airways all. And travel, there was a sort of input by the governments to sort of, for the local population to travel. The governments are encouraging at that point of time for their population to sort of go out and study and travel different geographies. And that was also the time when these markets, which were dominated by the national carriers or one or two carriers, saw an explosion of the LCCs, both flying into the region, but also in terms of the new LCCs like the Air Arabias and the Fly Dubais and the Jazeera starting in that point of the world. So we saw that as a very, very right set of characteristics which we saw in India back in 2006, sort of been shaping the sort of the ground there, and that's sort of when we took that product and sort of in terms of what we built, localized those products to that market and sort of took it there. But we also had encountered very, very soon there were a few challenges. Obviously, being an Indian brand, we were known with the Indian expat population, but then other than the Indian expat population, we were not known. The brand awareness was a big problem. Then there was a language, which is a big problem. You were English was okay up to the expats from the English speaking the countries, but obviously these a lot of these Middle Eastern countries today are the melting pots of the world. Like take the example of Dubai. They claim they have about close to 170 odd nationalities which live in that city itself. And then obviously, how do you sort of make sure that there are the local supplier side connects that you have to make sure that you're able to give the most relevant and the most useful content to your customers, and then how you sort of making sure that you are working in the right payment ecosystem and partnerships to make it work. And obviously, that means that we sort of went and spent a lot, very heavy in the brand, which is using the traditional mediums, and also sort of using a lot more what we call as more creative, localized version. Now, this is one example for that. Saudi is one country because of certain restriction. Social media, Twitter is the most popular form of social media. Facebook, probably 10% of the population uses. Instagram, even less because of obviously certain religious restrictions. But Twitter is the most popular form of social media, and everybody is on Twitter. And that country has a mobile penetration of about 160%, which basically means 80% of the population has more than one phones. So, and these guys like to stay very, very engaged in that. So, and there is an army of influentials which would play a very, very crucial role. And we had a sort of a social media campaign, which we call it a Fake It campaign, which was launched in 2018 and got the award in the GCC for the best social media campaign, and we sort of also got a recognition and the award for that among the top 5 social media engagement campaign globally, and which was essentially about sort of how do you sort of instead of going into the destination, how you can sort of go and fake that you've been in that destination. So that sort of had a sort of very great reach and sort of took our brand to sort of great heights in there. And then we also sort of are the local sponsors for the number one football team in the GCC. In fact, this year they won the Asian football club football championship, which is the equivalent of the Champions League that you have in Europe, called Flying. So we are the sponsors for that. And obviously, how do you sort of go and localize that and make it to the sort of local language there, which is in the Arabic. We also look at in terms of, look at the inorganic strategy, which is in terms of, using the acquisition to sort of fast track your penetration in that. So as I said, we closed the transaction with Flying, which was the homegrown number one travel company, online travel company in Saudi. Sort of, we today, is fully integrated into the ClearTrip, and in Saudi we operate under the two brands, which is ClearTrip as well as Flying. And then we sort of, said, we build in the local connect with the suppliers, which basically means in making sure that we connect directly with the increasing number of low-cost carriers in the region, either homegrown or flying into the region, and in a way, sort of, work with work with the government, work with the banks to ensure there is the payment ecosystem thrives in there with the workings of like the Visas and Mastercards and the local banks and the Apple Pays to sort of make sure the adoption and the sort of general encouragement of the digital payment infrastructure. So result of that is today in 2020 we are by far the largest online travel in the region, with over 65% share in the whole GCC of the all online transaction. In countries like UAE, we had about 85% share, and Saudi, which is about close to 60% share in that. And the next, as we sort of look at this decade, is we are looking at the Africa as a sort of new frontier, when we sort of kind of look at in terms of certain countries which are have the same right set of characteristics that we saw back in India and what we sort of saw in the Middle East in there. And as I said, this is that's Africa is today the second fastest growing aviation market in the Asia Pacific. Still have a very small share of the global tourism as well as in terms of the global aviation market, but this is something which is growing very fast. It has one of the youngest population in the world, which is sort of again sort of with a very sort of potentially large potential future market in there. The very diverse destinations, again the infrastructure varies when you go from one region to the other, and where air connectivity plays a very important part of that. And the governments are putting a lot of trust on tourism, which basically means there will be a lot more sort of people sort of coming from the other parts of the world, which is sort of into those countries, and that will sort of give an economic sort of boost to the countries and raising the local income levels, and that's sort of increasing the economic activity and the needs for travel. And these are the markets which are again at a very sort of low e-commerce penetration today, and there are right set of characteristics that we have sort of seen that in India, and we have sort of seen that in the Middle East, and we know how to sort of navigate onto these in there. As I said, when we kind of look at on the quadrant in terms of the online penetration for travel as well as the travel frequency, that's where we were probably 10 or 15 years back, where the low internet penetration and the low frequency to the travel in there. So that's sort of as I said, goes very well in terms of our strategies to position ourselves as the the leading travel, online travel company of what we call as the emerging world, because there are a lot of similar characteristics that we have, that we sort of share in there, and probably there'll be a lot of similarity in the journey, but obviously, you will have to sort of go and adapt to what will be the differences that you sort of operate from one region or one country to the other. But in terms of the general characteristics or the general challenges will be pretty much the sort of same in there. So in a nutshell, when you sort of if you have an aspiration to take your brands or your organization into the different parts of the world, or from your home market, is first is understand the customer needs and build a product which can be differentiated. Explore what are the sort of the key characteristics and problem statements that the customers that of where you want to sort of target, and what are the key challenges that they're saying, and then look in terms of customize your product offering to that. Look at the corridors in terms of where there's a relationship that you can sort of look at in terms of which we call it sort of corridors of travel. Then we kind of look at India, UAE is a big corridor of travel. UAE, Saudi is a big corridor of travel. Saudi, Egypt, another big corridor of travel. Sort of Saudi or Saudi, UAE to Turkey, big corridor of travel. In terms of that, sort of give you a connectivity and sort of relevance when you go in terms of from the supplier connects in there. Enter the new markets and build leadership fairly quickly, because as I said, if you leave it for too long, there will be a lot of other people who will be sort of coming and doing it that, and customize and localize without losing your core brand proposition, because that's something which is sort of is your key strengths. Play on your key strengths, try and localize your key strengths and mold them to what sort of is relevant for those the new markets that you are sort of go in there. So thank you very much.